Welcome to Regal Roundtable, the talk show that discusses hot topics and current events from a male perspective. I'm your host, Todd A. Smith, and today we'll be talking about racial profiling and race relations in America in the wake of the Trayvon Martin murder. To my left, we have country music artist Mike Stites joining us on the panel, and to my right, we have community activist Quanell X. I'm going to give this first question to both panelists, but I want Mike to answer first. If Trayvon was your son, how would you respond to the way the Sanford police have responded and their lack of justice, and how would you respond to George Zimmerman's actions?
Well, obviously as a parent you're upset. I mean, losing a child's one of every parent's nightmares. But by the same token, you know, the police can only do what they can do, and you know, one of the things I wouldn't do is I wouldn't be trademarking these phrases. I think it shows a little bit of insincerity, trademarking these phrases for monetary gain from such a tragic loss. I mean, I think that there's better ways to grieve and mourn and get through such a tragic time.
Before I go to Quanell, I want to piggyback off what you said about the trademark, because I have a difference of opinion. Because at the rallies, you do have people selling merchandise with Trayvon's name. Who do you think should get those proceeds? Should it be Joe Blow on the streets, or do you think it should be Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin, his parents?
Well, I think if people are going to be selling the T-shirts, then the right thing to do as people would be to give part of those proceeds to the parents of Trayvon Martin. However, we are a capitalist society. This is a free market economy, and you have the right to go out and make a profit off certain things. And if anything, as the parents, I would just be happy that the message of Trayvon Martin and the death and everything is getting out to the public.
Let me go to Quanell on that. Quanell, how would you respond if Trayvon was your son and he was gunned down by George Zimmerman, and Zimmerman wasn't arrested by Sanford police, and they don't seem to be caring too much about it?
Well, let me first say thank you and your program for giving us both the opportunity to discuss Trayvon Martin and what's happening in Sanford, Florida.
Thank you for coming.
I want to greet you and your viewing audience with the greeting words of peace of Assalamu alaikum. Those words simply mean may peace be unto you. I would hope and pray, for I am a father. I have a 19-year-old son. And I would hope and pray that I would never have to wake up one morning and realize that my son has been gunned down by anyone. So, God forbid, I pray to never be in that man's shoes. But I know what it's like to lose a very close loved one, for I lost my brother under very similar circumstances. When I listen to you both talk about copyright infringement, because that's really what this is about.
Definitely.
The family wanted to copyright Trayvon Martin's image, copyright his name, copyright his likeness. And yes, they should be grateful, and they are grateful that the story about their son's murder is going before the whole world and the country. But for them to allow their son's image and name to be exploited for financial gain and benefit, they would not be wise parents if they did not do something legally to control that. Because if people were printing shirts and just giving them away, if they were printing stickers just giving them away, that's one thing. But to be producing shirts and using his image and likeness for monetary gain, yes, we are a capitalistic society, but we should not be a society that exploits the suffering and the hurt of a family for financial gain.
All right, thank you. I want to go to Mike with this question. I hear a lot of non-African Americans complain that we play the race card too much, and it can't be that bad, and this, that, and other. How does playing the so-called race card constantly, as we're accused of doing, how does that play a role in us alleging racism? How is that perceived by other communities, and does it make it harder to believe?
Well, ultimately, it's a lot like the story of the boy that cried wolf. If you constantly making these claims and they're not always full of substance. I'm not going to say they're never full of substance, because racism is a problem in America, and it does happen. I think we've come a long way from where we were 50 years ago, and we've made tremendous leaps and bounds as a society. A lot of the younger generation, younger children, don't even really see race anymore. Those are just kids. Those are just their friends. They're other people. It's the older generation that have had to deal with the struggles of the past that seem to not be able to necessarily let go of what's happened in the past. I'm not saying that they don't have a right to be upset or angry. I'm just saying that sometimes when every time something comes up, if it's always a race issue, then it does seem like it's a little bit overplayed.
I'm going to go to Quanell so we can piggyback off that. Do you think that we're playing the race card. I personally think that when you've been victimized by racism, you might be oversensitive. You might think some things are racism when it may not be. But do you think that we're playing the race card, so quote unquote, too much, or should we constantly talk about race?
Well, I don't want to piggyback because I don't believe in eating pork. But I will speak to what he spoke of.
Yes, sir.
And what he directly spoke to, the race card issue. It's very strange when white people would say that black people are playing the race card when we were not the ones who gave ourselves that card in the first place. See, they have to understand that today was built from yesterday, and tomorrow is built to determine what we do today. But as Christ said, in the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, a people who do not know their history are predestined to repeat it. And a tree without its roots is a dead tree. The roots of us as black people in this country are rooted in our history and our life experiences. But the vast majority of white people in this country, especially young white people, have never thoroughly been taught and exposed and properly educated of what took place during oppression and slavery, Jim Crow legislation and segregation, the lynching era, the civil rights movement. Most white people know very little of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They reduced him to 4 little words: I have a dream. But if we really had a chance to tell our story, for Hollywood has ran from the real story of what has happened to black people in this country. So yes, there are some among us who will use race as a cover to try to say, well, it's racism why I didn't get the bank loan. It's racism why I did not graduate. It's racism why I did not get that job. And it's not always racism. But most white people subconsciously, when they are being racist in their mindsets and their attitudes, they're not even aware of it. So there needs to be a frank and candid dialogue and discussion about the problems of race in this nation. And we must, as black people, give white people the opportunity to freely speak their mind and their heart without calling them racist.
I don't want to cut you off, but you brought up 2 good points. I want to ask you 2 questions, basically about the history. Why are we, as African Americans, kind of persuaded to avoid our history as opposed to the Jews and the Holocaust, where that's taught to us all the time? And why can't we have an honest dialogue on racism? I have people tell me if you mention race, then you're automatically a racist. I think the people who shy away from race are the racists. What do we have to do to get to the point where we can have that honest dialogue, and how can we persuade people to appreciate African American history like we appreciate Jewish history and their struggles?
Well, you have to applaud Jewish people, because every year they always make sure that they do certain things constructively to remind the world and remind themselves and their children the Jewish Holocaust. According to Jewish historians and scholars, they lost 6 million lives in Nazi Germany under Nazi rule. Well, according to great black scholars and some white scholars in the transatlantic slave trade, we lost between 50 to 100 million just thrown overboard before we ever made it to America in the slave trade. The reason why they do not want really African Americans in this nation talking about the issues of the slave trade and segregation and lynching, etc. Because if we talk too much about it, then somebody may say, well, have we ever thoroughly, properly investigated it? And then if we thoroughly investigate slavery and oppression of black people in this nation and truly look at it and all of the factual evidence come out, then the question may be raised by us. We want justice. See, if you get us to forgive and forget, we'll never ask for justice. One thing about Jewish people, they have asked for reparations and they've been paid it. Still to this day, if a Jewish organization or group will find a Nazi German soldier involved in the Nazi Holocaust in the 40s, if he's in Europe, if he's in Turkey, if he's in Asia, if he's in Black Africa, those Jewish groups can capture him, arrest him, and take him to Israel and put him on trial. Could you imagine if there was ever a thorough investigation of what has happened to us in this nation, and we stood up and said, we want justice as the descendants of those who were oppressed, who were murdered, who were killed? We want justice. And they know that if they ever had to truly give us justice, the price would be too high. So get us to forget about it.
Let me cut you off. Let's go to the streets and let's talk to the people of Houston and see what they're saying about racial profiling, the race card, and justice for African Americans, all Americans. We'll be back with more Regal Roundtable.
Role in the election has played a big part of us unifying and basically uniting, especially the minorities, coming out and actually understanding what the election is all about and the campaigns and what they're trying to do for our America or our futures.
What do you say to people that say that President Obama's white upbringing disqualifies him from being black?
I don't think if you have black in you, you can be disqualified from being black. I mean, you're black. But I definitely think that he definitely had more of an advantage than just like somebody growing up, like we growing up.
Okay. What do you hope America learns from the death of Trayvon Martin?
That there still is kind of prejudices going on, and that we really, really need to kind of attack it from the surface and stop like acting like it's not there and it doesn't exist.
Welcome back to Regal Roundtable, and I'm going to want to direct this next question to Mike. Mike, Trayvon has been labeled as suspicious, and I've been labeled as suspicious as a child walking through certain neighborhoods. What is your definition of suspicious, and what would you think of if you saw a black guy with a hoodie walking through your neighborhood versus a Hispanic or a Caucasian?
Well, the word suspicious actually derives from, a suspect, somebody who is suspect of doing harm or wrong. Now, in this particular instance with Trayvon Martin, 2 weeks prior to the incident, there had been a rash of break-ins throughout this neighborhood. These suspects were labeled as black males. So I could consider Trayvon looking suspicious, being dark, hoodie to cover up your appearance, to a neighborhood watch individual who was trying to protect the neighborhood and his neighbors from these break-ins that have been happening throughout the neighborhood.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Quanell next on this one, but personally, I see what you're saying, but as an African-American male, I've been put in that situation too. 1992, officer's name was BP Evans. I was 13 years old, walking down the street, playing basketball with my friends. I was stopped. Somebody's house had been broken into. And I was always outspoken. I was like, what the hell does that have to do with me? You look suspicious. I thought anybody looked suspicious. How does that, Quanell, when are we going to get past the fact that, okay, if it's an African-American suspect, then now all African-Americans are on trial? I personally, that's profiling to me. That's profiling. What would you think if you heard somebody approach you like that because there had been some break-ins by African-American men?
I understand that possibly there have been a great number of African-American men who've broken into homes in that particular gated community. I don't know that to be a fact. I have not seen the numbers. But let's just say it's true. Well, then I could see why some would be suspicious of African-American men. But does that justify you profiling African-American men? Does it justify you personally detaining African-American men walking in the neighborhood? And does that suspicion cause you to make a misjudgment call, thinking that that man does not belong there because it's a predominantly white neighborhood, when that African-American young man was committing no crime? He was going to his father's home in that gated community. So the suspicion and the prejudice caused Mr. Zimmerman to make a bad judgment call by approaching Trayvon Martin in the first place. Had he listened to the 911 dispatcher and refrained from approaching him, I don't think we'd be sitting here having this discussion today. But the bigger issue is, and this is a challenge for us as black people, what role have we subconsciously and knowingly played in allowing the image of black men to be distorted in this nation without consequence and without protest? We as African-American men and black people must take some serious responsibility for how we've allowed the image of young black men to be created as a suspicious image, and the image of black men, period, being suspect. We have not done enough to clean up our image. We have not done enough to take responsibility as older men to young black men, saying, do not walk around with your pants hanging out to where your underwear is showing and you got a hoodie on your head. Because so many in the media, when you see robberies in liquor stores and jewelry stores and smash and grab robberies, you're showing some young African-American male with a hoodie on his head. So that has been stereotypical of the hoodie black male in crime. But what have we done as black men to say to the world, there's a different image of us, and this is the image we want you to see? We can't expect white folk to do that. We have to do that ourselves.
I agree. I want to piggyback on what Quanell said about accountability, and I've heard a lot of non-African Americans criticize the black community for protesting against George Zimmerman, who happens to be mixed, Hispanic and white, but not protesting against African Americans who kill other African Americans and aren't arrested. what do you say to that? Do you think that kind of prohibits the movement from being taken seriously, or should we make more of an effort to hold our own people accountable as well?
You bring up a very good point, because there is quite a staggering number of black-on-black crime in America, in a lot of urban areas such as here in Houston, Los Angeles, New York. There's lots of black-on-black crime, and it's not as widely the media doesn't pick up on these things near as much, because it's not as controversial. It's not something that's going to sell newspapers and bump ratings. However, I did want to comment on something that Quanell had said, and I agree with you. I think that we have to work together as a white community and a black community to establish, to get rid of certain stereotypes from the past. Now, I did want to bring back up, being in the neighborhood, and it's not just that all black males wearing a hoodie are suspicious. It was in that particular neighborhood that there were black males who had been breaking into several homes, so that's what made that particular black male look suspicious. Now, had it been Hispanics that had been breaking into the homes around the area, would Trayvon have been considered suspicious? In my opinion, no, because it was Hispanic males that had been doing the breaking in around the community. Therefore, he would have no reason to be suspect because he was not a Hispanic male. You see what
I want to go to Quanell with this next question, because you talked about Hispanic males and black males. Why is there not as much attention placed on black and brown racism versus black and white racism? If you talk to any young kid growing up, there's a lot of racial tension between the Hispanic community and the African American community, but you really don't hear about that in the media.
In the state of California, the last several major riots within the penal prison system in California has been between Hispanics and African Americans. And in fact, in Los Angeles, there was this big uproar and outcry about Hispanic gangs in prison giving instructions to Hispanic men in the community to kill any black person who was seen in a Hispanic neighborhood. There is a problem there. But let me say this to you. The number one cartoon character in Mexico is a little mice called Min Min. And Min Min was a little monkey-like figure with big black ears, ethnic black features, and portrayed as a little black child. So even the injection of the disease of white supremacy has affected our own Hispanic brothers and sisters. If you go in Latin America, in Colombia, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Panama, you'll see the color dynamic existing even in those Latin American countries where the black Panamanian, the black Colombian, the black Cuban is on the bottom and the lighter white-skinned ones are on top. You'll see the civil rights struggle in those Latin American countries of the dark-skinned Latin American brother or sister fighting for equality and justice in their own countries because they're suffering racism based on skin color. Because the same slave masters that dropped us off in America dropped our cousins and brothers and sisters off in Latin America. So there's a color dynamic even among Hispanics when it comes to black and white.
I'll throw this next question out. You talk about the slave ships and docking in America. A lot of people think because we have an African American in the White House that was of racism. We heard it post-racial America. What type of impact does that have on real racism? I mean, because a lot of people don't think it exists. I mean, has Obama's election been kind of like a blessing and a curse where we don't talk about race enough?
Brother, I don't know if you really want me to answer the question about the president.
Go ahead.
Because we may not have the time. You call President Obama an African American. He is a black man. But is he truly an African American?
I would say he would be. I mean, my definition of an African American is an American of African descent. He's definitely of African descent.
Well, let's talk about it.
Okay, let's go ahead.
Now, President Obama was raised in Hawaii by his white grandparents. He didn't go to school with black people. He didn't play sports with black people in Hawaii. He didn't grow up having the African American experiences, cultural realities like black people in this country in Hawaii, because in Hawaii there's only a 1% African American population in Hawaii. And so Barack Obama, if you asked Barack Obama, what was it like spending time with your black uncles growing up as a young black male? He would say, my uncles were in Africa, we had no relationship. What was it like growing up with your black aunties and having experiences with them, with your black cousins, etc.? He would have to say, I had no relationship with them because they were all in Africa, and he didn't have that in America. So if you ask Barack Obama, well, what was it like going to school with African Americans in junior high, high school, elementary, even in college, pledging a black sorority or something like that, fraternal organization? He would have to say, I had not that experience. So the typical African American experience in America, Brother Barack Obama has not had that experience. He is a black man, yes, but the African American cultural experiences, the brother has not had.
I agree with some of what you said, but because there are some commonalities that all African Americans deal with as far as the racism, the struggle. But I totally disagree with the fact that there is an African American.
What struggle did brother deal with in Hawaii?
He probably didn't, but there is no African American experience. My experience is different than yours, and I mean there are some commonalities and similarities that we deal with. But if a brother grew up in River Oaks, his experience as an African American male will be totally different. I totally disagree that African American and being black is an experience. It's a race. We have some common interests and commonalities, but we are way more diverse than that. Welcome back to Regal Roundtable. I want to direct this next question to Mike. CNN had a statistic that very few white Americans were and Republicans were involved in Trayvon Martin rallies and things of that nature, and they are getting tired of the coverage more so than minorities. Why is there a lack of participation for non-African Americans when statistics show that 3/4 of Americans think that what happened to Trayvon was wrong? Why haven't we got more white and Hispanic people to participate in these rallies?
Well, especially now during a time of an election period. You brought up Republicans. First of all, Republicans are going to be against anything the liberal media has to say, period. Whether it's Trayvon Martin or the election coverage or whatever it may be, Republicans are always going to have something wrong with what the liberal media is saying. Now, with that being said, white people as a whole, maybe the reason they don't get involved, and this is kind of going back to something that Quanell touched on earlier about the African American experience and being able to grow up. I grew up in a little town. I went to high school in a little town where I was the minority. There were 5% white people. There was about 80% that were Hispanic, and the rest of them were African American. So I grew up being, not having very few and far between of white people to hang out with. So I socialized with everybody. I've always socialized with everybody. I found it hard as myself, putting myself out there to befriend and become friends with African Americans in my school, because it seemed to me like sometimes they seemed to segregate themselves. They wouldn't let that Hispanic or that white influence into their group, into their clique. And I think doing that would maybe make white people and Hispanic people feel a little more comfortable to be able to approach and not feel so threatened, not in a physical violence type way, but threatened as far as just feeling uncomfortable, like they're unwanted, like why are you here hanging out with us?
I want to ask this next question to both of my guests, and I want Quanell to answer it first. How can we make sure that this never happens again? These tragedies like the Trayvon Martin situation, the Robbie Tolan situation, and here in the Bel Air area, how can we make sure that we learn from this and make sure this never happens again?
These situations will continue to happen because you're going to always have crime. You're going to always have some vigilantes. You're going to always have some people who act out on prejudices. I think our focus really must be, how do we as African Americans develop power within the criminal justice system? Because right now we are a powerless people in regards to the criminal justice system. If we were better organized, better educated about the criminal justice system in its entirety, then we would know how to effectively, properly, as a people, collectively engage the system for change. Could you imagine if we as black people decided we wanted our 4- and 5-year-old children to be able to rap all of the criminal statute laws on the books like they do a Lil Wayne song? Could you imagine if it became fashionable in our community to read all of the political laws that govern your community and how to engage the political machine and structure within your said community? If that became fashionable as low-riding jeans?
It's changed the world.
The problem is we have to start with ourselves first. Yep. Charity starts at home first, as Minister Farrakhan said, then it spreads abroad. We have to start internally fixing the internal sickness and disease within our own community. Then we can talk about engaging other nations and other races. But right now, you're asking why so many white people are not joining on with these rallies for Trayvon Martin. Well, remember when all of the Hispanics were stepping out and protesting all over the country about immigration, and they didn't want that law passed in California that would hurt this nation and Hispanics within this nation? You didn't see a large number of white people joining those marches. And you didn't see a large number of black people joining those marches. America is separate, whether we want to admit to it or not, because white people feel if it's not affecting them, they don't want to get involved. We too feel if it's not affecting us, we don't want to get involved. Hispanics and Asians and Arabs feel the same way. Yes, we're all diverse in this nation, but we are separately diverse in this nation also.
Definitely. I want to go to Mike before we close out. What can we do? What can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again and we can grow together? Like you said, we are separated, we are segregated. You talk about schools, we talked about the school situation. What can we do to make sure that this never happens again?
Well, I agree with Quanell. Unfortunately, there's nothing that really can. Something of this nature will happen again. It's unfortunate, but it's the world that we live in. You look back to things like Columbine and the Virginia Tech shootings. These are all tragic events. Maybe not quite on this same topic as far as racial profiling, but they're all tragic events nonetheless that are going to happen and take place. All we can do as a society and as a community is try to come together and find some common ground, find some commonality so that we can come together and just preach a positive message of race relations, like you were saying, and being able to have that communication, that open line of communication, so that one day we can stomp racism out and make it not a part of this world.
Definitely. I want to thank y'all again. I want to thank Mike Stice for joining us, Quanell X for joining us on the Regal Roundtable. I want to thank the great people of Grooves of Houston for opening their doors for us in Houston. If you're ever in Houston, if you live in Houston, visit them at 2300 Pierce Street. Visit them online at houstongrooves.com. Visit regalmag.com, the preeminent online magazine for African American men. Follow us on Twitter at Regal Media. Like us on Facebook under Regal Media Group. And as always in parting, I urge all of my viewers to step up to the throne and reclaim your royalty. Thank you for joining us on the first season of Regal Roundtable. A lot has changed since we originally filmed this episode on Trayvon Martin. George Zimmerman has been arrested and he's awaiting trial. Many people predict that it will begin in June. We want to thank y'all once again for joining us this first season. It has been an historic run. It's been an exciting run. If you've missed any of our first episodes, you can visit us on YouTube just by going to Regal Roundtable. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Regal TV1. That's Regal TV and the number 1, and that's all one word. And for any information on season 2, which is coming soon, and we anticipate more exciting guests, more exciting topics, go to our new website, regal-media-group.com for more information on season 2 of Regal Roundtable. Always check out for regalmag.com, the preeminent online magazine for African American men. And until I see you again in season 2, all of my viewers, step up to the throne and reclaim your royalty.